Welcome to Worship in Place. This morning's message is in the parlor, and it felt more because of the subject matter in which we're going to be dealing, and God's laid on my heart that we needed to have something of a reminiscent of a fireside chat as we talk about some of the dominant feelings that people are having in our culture right now. And it brought to mind an incident and an episode at the end of Jesus' life and before he ascended into heaven to be with the Father and sit at the right hand of glory. I want to start by simply naming that the dominant thing that I hear being expressed on social media and in mainstream media, and even sometimes in churches as I've surfed around in different congregations, is this dominant theme of fear. Whether it's masks and gloves, or going to Walmart or Costco demanding that you wear a face mask now, or when will this end, and this overarching sense of dread that this has an ongoing legacy producing presence called COVID-19, that the world will never be the same. But it may sound trite to say, or to quote FDR when he said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But there's a tremendous truth to us choosing our attitudes. There's a tremendous truth to us choosing the trajectory on which we launch our lives and the rock on which we place our trust. That there's an old maxim that says that choose your attitude before noon, or your attitude will choose you for the rest of the day. That there's a battlefield of the mind that takes place in times like this, where in our mind we will borrow from tomorrow, and we will borrow anxiety, and we will fret over things that often never materialize, yet we've expended tremendous mental, emotional, and even spiritual energy in doing battle with things that have yet to come. It's enough, Jesus said, to deal with the matters and the troubles that are given to us each day. And as we lean into this morning's lesson, I want to characterize it as, sort of like Charles Dickens did in The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times and the worst of times. And the two cities that I want us to consider this morning are the cities of Capernaum, on the city of Galilee, in the area around the Sea of Galilee, and Jerusalem. Because there are going to be two people who lived in those areas, one in Capernaum proper, and one in a little village called Kirioth, which is very near Jerusalem. And first I want to spend some time with Kirioth. Kirioth it doesn't exist anymore. We can't even find where it was really located, though it was a town that was apparently thriving around Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. And there was a man who lived there in Kirioth who was smart, and he was trusted, and he was a climber, and apparently he had a very good business acumen, but he was also a product of his times. Kirioth was near enough Jerusalem in the city of passion and worship and political intrigue that he did show that he had a lot of interest. We have to remember historically that Jesus was not born into a political vacuum, nor was he born into a spiritual vacuum. In the day of Jesus, there were incredibly high expectations about the materialization of the Messiah, that there were people who were all over the nation expecting a Messiah to come. The boot of Roman oppression was hard upon the Jewish nation, and they had lived under that oppressive boot for many, many years. There had been accommodations made with the Hasmonean Empire, which essentially took over the whole temple and all of its business. So you had the Sadducees who came out of that, and their expectation was to keep business going, to make sure that there were accommodations and compromises made that would allow them to continue to conduct temple business. But don't forget that there were many, many other groups that were vying for the heart and soul of the people. They were the Pharisees, who were the lay pastors. They were the ones who intentionally were seeing that the road and path to redemption for not just individuals but for the nation was to adhere to the strict Mosaic codes. And so they spent their time researching and studying and interpreting, and there were different schools of thought that developed around the interpretations of Scripture within the Pharisaic schools. But you also had people who were politically minded that saw that the nation state of Israel needed to be captured back from its oppressors. And so there were folks who had a messianic view of a king like David or Jehu, a general that would take on the oppressors. And these people became known as the Zealots. These are important factors because all of them were Jews. All of them were expecting a Messiah. All of them were trying to figure out what the Messiah would do and say. And you know what? Jesus didn't fit any of that. Not in the ways that they came. They looked. This man of Kirioth was a product of his time. And it's not unlike America today, where we have people vying to create a political nation state, people who are trying to say that God is on this side or God is on that side, or trying to create God in their own image. This man of Kirioth was apparently involved, and he wanted to stay involved. And he was involved to such a point that he apparently was politically connected. At least he knew who the players were, and he was mindful of who the players were that were taking on more and more power. It's astute, I think, of us to look at this man of Kirioth, because in many ways he is like us. In many ways he is like us. He was surveying, I guess you'd say, the surrounding milieu in which he was growing up. He was assessing who the players were. And in his being connected to Jerusalem, he was a Judean Jew, which meant that he was one of those who was identified in the Jewish community as being a true Jew, because he grew up in Judea, he grew up in Kirioth, he was known by his town's name, and he also spent apparently a lot of time with the business people in Jerusalem. Now, what's important for us in this moment of looking at the Tale of Two Cities is that Kirioth was regionally connected to Jerusalem. In this period of Israel's history, there still was a divided kingdom. Judea, the southern kingdom, was the place of true worship. It was the place of the temple still. It was a place where if you were a Jew, that's where you were. To the north, in the Galilean district, where I mentioned Capernaum, it was on the outskirts of Samaria, what was the remnant of the northern kingdom before it entirely disappeared after the Babylonian exile. The 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel completely disappeared, never to be heard of, really. Again, just assimilating into the nations that would occupy what would become Samaria. So this man of Kirioth was a curiosity, but he was also someone who had something in him that he knew was more. It's an interesting thing that in the church we often committee things to death. If we want to solve something, we're going to committee it at least 3 or 4 times. And that's why sometimes we talk about ourselves being, we want to do things all decently and in order. And so if we want to do that, we'll create a committee around it. I'm sure that this man of Kirioth had noticed that there were formal channels of power and informal channels of power. I don't know about you, if you've ever been a member of a church like this before, but I know in some churches that I've served, there were the formal committees that were supposed to be doing things, or task forces, but the real power decisions were made under the oak tree after church, when people would get together and talk about what really should be done. I really think that in some ways this man of Kerioth was astute enough to know. Why do I say that? It's because somewhere along the line, this man of Kerioth met Jesus. He met Jesus, and we don't know anything about how he met Jesus. What we do know is that he met Jesus at some point, and Jesus saw something in him that had integrity, something of promise, something of capacity. But we don't know if this man was a follower of John the Baptist and had been on that trajectory to meet Jesus. We don't know if he had been part of the crowds around Tiberias or around the Jordan. We don't know how he met Jesus, only that at some point this man from Kerioth, this smart, astute, politically savvy, connected, business-minded person met Jesus. And he became a disciple, but also at some point Jesus called him to be part of the 12, part of the apostoloi. Now the word apostle is rooted in a Greek word that means messenger, but also has an intent on that was used later in Acts, that a person who was an apostle also had to be an eyewitness to the resurrected Jesus. Well, he was chosen to be a witness to Jesus. This man of Kerioth traveled for 2.5 years watching Jesus raise people from the dead. He watched Jesus feed 5,000. And there was something of trustworthy nature of this man of Kerioth that even his peers trusted him to some degree, because they gave him the books, so to speak. He became the treasurer of their small band of followers. I wonder sometimes, when I think about this man of Kerioth, I wonder sometimes what he thought about when he would hear Jesus say, you can't serve two masters. It's either God or money. Or there was a rich man and there was a Lazarus, the poor, and the rich man went to hell and Lazarus went to the bosom of Abraham. Or the parable Jesus would tell about the rich man who wanted to pull down his barns only to find out that his soul would be required of him that night. But you see, I think that this man of Kerioth is like us in many ways. Sometimes we come to Jesus with our own agenda. We want to put Jesus in our own box. How many times have I heard it said, or even said myself, my Jesus wouldn't ask me to do that. My Jesus wouldn't ask me to go there. My Jesus wouldn't take care of those people. Only to find out my Jesus wouldn't, because my Jesus had become too small and I'd put Jesus in a box. You see, there was a book many years ago that was written, Men from Mars and Women from Venus, and it talked about the differences in our thinking. I kind of like the new analogy that says men are like waffles and women like spaghetti. Because with spaghetti, the analogy is, well, everything touches each other and everything kind of gets blended together, but waffles are compartmentalized. And I know that it is true for me, and it's true for a lot of my brothers, that we can be compartmentalized in our thinking, in our actions, in our behavior. This is who I am at the golf course, this is who I am at work, this is who I am playing golf, this is who I am hunting, this is who I am at church. And it's like a waffle that the pieces don't ever blend over into each other. In some ways, I see this man of Kerioth being the everyman, the every person for us. That in some way he had compartmentalized of who he was and his own agenda about who Jesus was. He'd seen all these miraculous things, but there was still his own agenda at work in his heart. There was an old pastor friend of mine who said one time, he said, it doesn't take much of a person to be a Christian, but it takes all the person that there is. The whole person has to be present. In other words, we don't have to be the most skilled, educated, erudite, politically savvy, connected person to follow Jesus. But what Jesus wants is all of us, not just the compartmentalized part of us that we bring to a Sunday morning or to a Bible study or to our friends when we want to look good. Jesus wants our entire heart. And if we have a heart that's divided, then we're not giving our entire selves to Jesus. And that's why I say this man of Kiriath represents us in many ways. There have been times when I've wanted to just say, Jesus, that's too hard. And we heard a lot of disciples talk about that. It's too hard to love that person. It's too hard to forgive that person. Jesus, I just can't. I want to hold on to my grudge. I want to hold on to my failure. I want to hold on to this secret sin in my life. I want to hold on to this piece of unforgiveness that I don't want to extend to somebody. The man of Kiriath, in so many ways, represents us. Now, what does that say about what he did in his own life? Well, one of the things I know that when we compartmentalize ourselves, we keep Jesus from those deepest places in our lives that may need healing. The places where resentment is fostered, where anger is fed. It's easy to catch ourselves not really paying attention to Jesus if we're so focused on what we ourselves want. I remember a couple, they were talking to me, and the woman said, I realized that we've been seeing each other 6 months, and I said to my boyfriend, I said, we've been seeing each other 6 months, and then he didn't say anything. He was just silent. And I began to think, oh my goodness, he's not where I am. He's not connected to the same place. He's not thinking the same things. And he was just silent. And I said, brother, what were you thinking? He said, 6 months. I don't think I've had my oil changed. You see, if we can be so lost in our own agendas and thoughts, we're not even hearing what critically is at stake. And Jesus is calling out to his disciples, to you, to me, to give our whole heart. Now, here's the thing about Kiriath. If you translate it into the language that we know, it's the town of Iscariot. And every time that we deal with failures, every time we deal with our own compartmentalization, every time we deal with putting our own agendas ahead of where Jesus is trying to take us, every time that we try to do anything out of self-centeredness, we really have more in common with our brother Judas of Iscariot. You see, I think he's been caricatured in a lot of ways. He's been so caricatured through the years, and we only talk about him once, maybe around the Easter time, about his betrayal, that we fail to miss how much he, like us, in every way, was simply wanting Jesus to be what he wanted him to be. How many times have we done that? And when Jesus fails to do what we want him to do, then we say he's not real, or he's not loving, or he really is not powerful. That Jesus wouldn't do that, so he wouldn't love, so he doesn't love us. And every time we do that, we fall into the same Judas trap. You see, Jesus knew that they all would abandon him. They all would betray him, not just Judas. Now, I've heard some theological debates over the years. Well, if Jesus knew he was going to be betraying him. Well, if that's true, that he was chosen because he was going to be the betrayer, then essentially Jesus betrayed himself. Jesus knew all of them would run away. When the shepherd was struck, the sheep all went astray. See, this is something that sometimes you and I are caught in. We've had failure. We've lived with compartmentalized lives. We've lived with divided hearts. And this is where I really just want to speak directly to your heart, because I know somebody's listening right now that's struggling. That all you're wanting to do, because all you see is a mountain of regret and a mountain of failure, and you think you have no options. Judas climbed that mountain of regret and he hung himself. He was so encumbered by just his past, he couldn't see that the one who raised Lazarus, the one who raised the widow of Nain's son, the one who fed, was the source of life and the source of love. I mentioned at the beginning of this the tale of two cities. Capernaum. Capernaum was the hometown of Peter. What did Peter do? Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And when you read the gospel account in Mark and Luke and Matthew, there's this one notation that is so poignant, that when Jesus was being mocked and when he was being beaten and he was being tried before the Sanhedrin, and Jesus looks at the moment that Peter denies him, it tells me that Jesus, he already knew what was happening. But here's the difference, you and me, and this is where we need to, I want you to hear this clear, my beloved. Judas didn't wait for the resurrection, because all he saw was his failure, all he saw was his pain, all he saw was the mountain and rubble of regret. Peter had the same regret. Peter had the same rubble of failure. You know, when Jesus met Peter on the shoreline of his failure in John 21, and he comes and he takes Peter beside him and he says, "Peter, do you love me?" And 3 times he asked Peter the question, "Do you love me?" And we preachers have over time distilled that to, well, each time he was asking, "Do you love me?" it was a covering of each of his sins. But there's something I want us to even go deeper. You know, you have a choice. We all have a choice. That there is a way through the heartache and the heartbreak and the mountain of rubble in our lives. That Judas thought he had no option. You and I have that same, sometimes darkness in our lives, and Jesus wants to come to say, you have an option, my sister, my brother. And it's in my love for you. I can just picture it, that picture of Jesus and Judas, and him saying, "Judas, do you love me?" And I think Judas would have collapsed and wept in the same way that Peter did. And that I hope that you and I will continue to do. Our lives are not defined by our worst moments, friends, though we tend to want to do that. Our lives should be and can be defined by Jesus' best moment, where on the cross he demonstrated his love, and coming out of the grave and coming to us in resurrection power gives us a way through even our worst moments. So I ask you tonight, this morning, to hear Jesus say and ask you and to me, "Do you love me, sister? Do you love me, Harry? Do you love me?" Then I have a mission for you. Your life's not over. My life's not over because of failure. And no matter how smart, how connected, or powerful we may think we are, it's only in the hands of Jesus that we find complete rest and freedom from fear. Fear was the first word I began talking about this evening. And it's perfect love that casts out fear. It's the love that Jesus expressed to Peter, that he would have expressed to Judas, and that he does express to you and me. I pray that your Sunday is filled with the powerful love of Jesus, and that you go from this moment with a sense of purpose and success and joy in your life because of his resurrection love for you. God bless you, and have a great rest of your day.